everyone, welcome back to my channel and welcome to the second installment of my countdown series. If you followed me when I first started my channel, you may remember that my niche was originally going to be literature and writing. But as I got more into video essays, my channel has become more dedicated to random topics for video essays. But that doesn't mean discussions of literature on my channel are going away anytime soon. As far as history and literature go, I've always had a particular interest in American history and literature. This may be because America is my home country, or maybe there's something about it that just appeals to me. So today I'm going to count down the top 10 American novels of all time, both in terms of their general popularity and my thoughts on them. Disclaimer, I haven't actually read all of the books on this list, but for the ones I haven't, what I'm saying is that I really want to when I get the time, simply because I've heard such great things about the classics they supposedly are. That aside, let's get started. It seems as though every nation and culture has war novels, and almost all of them have at least one about said nation's involvement in one or both of the world wars of the 20th century. Slaughterhouse-Five, known alternatively as The Children's Crusade, is a semi-autobiographical anti-war novel told from the perspective of an unreliable narrator named Billy Pilgrim. Pilgrim travels through time in between serving as a chaplain's assistant in World War II, being captured by the German army, becoming a prisoner of war, surviving the firebombing of Dresden, and suffering from crippling PTSD for the rest of his life, all of which are experiences Vonnegut had himself as a serviceman in World War II. For me, Ernest Hemingway's A Farewell to Arms was required reading, not in my high school English class or even in my literature classes for my major, but for a gen ed I took called World War I in Text and Film. If you didn't already know this, you should be able to tell from the class name that the novel is set during World War I. A Farewell to Arms is told from the first-person perspective of Frederick Henry, who was serving as an ambulance driver in the Italian army. The novel centers around Henry's affair with English nurse Catherine Barclay. A Farewell to Arms was Hemingway's first bestseller and has been called the premier American war novel from that debacle World War I. Another staple of American high school reading lists, and one known for its roaring 20s themes and symbolism, particularly jazz music, social class, flapper culture, and speakeasies. With all of these things that came up in the book, it's pretty clear that The Great Gatsby's author, F. Scott Fitzgerald, viewed the society of 1920s New York with contempt for its supposed hedonism, social and class welfare, and loose morality. The novel itself is set on Long Island, New York, and its main character, Jay Gatsby, lives in the village of West Egg, where a neighbor named Nick Carraway moves in. Gatsby's distant relative, Daisy Buchanan, lives in East Egg with her husband, Tom, and Gatsby spends the novel trying to romantically pursue her. Eventually, it's revealed that Gatsby is a millionaire who made himself that way through bootlegging and selling alcohol during the Prohibition, when doing so was illegal. Spoiler alert. Conflicts between Gatsby, Tom, and Myrtle's widower George Wilson ultimately lead to Gatsby's demise. Although this novel was originally a commercial failure, it eventually established itself as one of the great American novels around the centennial of author Herman Melville's birth, nearly 30 years after his death. The novel has one of the most famous opening lines of any literary work, "Call me Ishmael." The novel is told from that character's perspective, who tells the story of Captain Ahab's fervent quest for revenge on the titular sperm whale who bit off his leg at the knee. Ishmael tells the story of Moby Dick through the use of storytelling devices such as sermons, soliloquies, and emblematic readings, just as a few examples. This one's a favorite on my mom's side of the family. While its portrayal of women may be considered a little outdated in 2022, it really spoke to girls and women of its time, especially the wives and daughters of those fighting the American Civil War, which serves as the story's backdrop. This novel, which is semi-autobiographical, of author Louisa May Alcott and her three sisters, Little Women tells the story of the coming of age of sisters Meg, Jo, Beth, and Amy March, who live in genteel poverty with their mother Marmee while their father is away serving in the Union Army. Meg is the family beauty who serves in her mother's place when the mother is absent. Jo is a rebellious tomboy who is passionate about reading and writing and rejects the traditional gender roles that were almost law of the time. Beth is the shy, gentle musician of the family whose health is weakened as a result of scarlet fever. The youngest sister, Amy, is the family artist. Let me start this one by saying that of everything I was assigned to read in high school, Catcher in the Rye was the one I found to be the most relatable as a teenager, and I'm sure many of my high school peers would agree with that sentiment. The main character, 17-year-old Holden Caulfield, is recounting the story of his life after his expulsion from Pensy Preparatory Academy for failing all of his classes except English. Holden has a serious problem with phonies, not only at Pensy Prep, but all around the world. What sets Holden apart from most 17-year-old boys of the 1950s is that he questions the supposed superficiality of the society he lives in, has a certain degree of respect for women, and genuinely loves his younger sister Phoebe. Some would classify Catcher in the Rye as a coming-of-age novel, but there's also quite a bit of debate as to whether or not Holden actually does, in fact, mature as a person by the end of the novel. Like Catcher in the Rye and The Great Gatsby, The Grapes of Wrath was required reading my sophomore year of high school. After reading it, we learned in class extensively about poverty and government aid programs in the United States, since poverty during the Great Depression is a major issue tackled in The Grapes of Wrath. During the Dust Bowl, many Okies, or Oklahomans, set out for California in search of jobs, land, dignity, and a better future. The Grapes of Wrath chronicles the long, hard journey of a fictitious Okie family, the Jodes, a family of tenant farmers who, like many around them, have been put out of work by drought, economic hardship, and agricultural industry changes brought on by the Dust Bowl. The reason The Grapes of Wrath is so often required reading in American high schools is because of the historical context it provides for the difficult American epoch that was the Great Depression. The average high school English curriculum would have you convinced that nearly all American literature was written by old white men, but that simply is not the case. In fact, I might even make another video in the future about top 10 best works of African American literature, as this subset of literature was not only written by and for a particularly oppressed group here in America, but actually tells the story of quite an interesting culture and history, at least in my opinion. One of the entries on this list would be The Color Purple by Alice Walker. Of course, there's a lot of good black literature that isn't about slavery, but reading and writing literature on this difficult topic is one of the first steps in addressing such a horror of our past. Author Alice Walker became inspired to write this novel out of a desire to connect with her ancestors, who themselves were slaves, by writing a story she felt would be similar to theirs. The novel has been frequently challenged and in some cases even banned, not only because of its painfully accurate depictions of slavery, but because of depictions of child abuse and incest, which Celie, the main character, suffers at the hands of her father Alfonso, which even results in Celie bearing a child named Olivia, whom Alfonso captures. When Celie is married off to a man named Mr., what should have been an escape from her father's abuse becomes an even more intense experience of physical, verbal, and sexual abuse, not only from Mr., but from his white children as well. While I wouldn't assign The Color Purple for middle school, or maybe even high school classes to read, I have to praise it for telling it like it is as far as these issues go. But speaking of banned and challenged books, in case you didn't already know, I've always had a preference for the dystopian and post-apocalyptic genre, since writing it requires a lot of creativity, and they tend to tackle real-world issues in a really unique way. A real dystopian classic of American literature is Fahrenheit 451, and its author, Ray Bradbury, has been called the king of the dystopian genre for his talent for writing such stories as Fahrenheit 451. Its themes of literary censorship have become very prevalent as of recent, particularly in wake of Florida's Don't Say Gay bill and other laws that have called for literature on hot-button topics to be removed from shelves and reading lists. Fahrenheit 451 tells the story of Guy Montag, who works as a fireman in a society where literary censorship has gotten so bad that books have been banned altogether. In this society, firemen do not put out fires, but rather start the fires that burn any books found by search parties. On one book burning mission, Guy steals a few books that he's supposed to burn, and it has an immense ripple effect. Going back to the importance of African Americans and slavery in American history, here's another important tale about that, even if it was written from the white perspective of Mark Twain. This classic is another frequently challenged work of American literature, mostly for its multiple uses of the N-word, despite its intention to provide the context of pervasive racism in its setting, and the take on race that was way ahead of the novel's time, but hasn't quite aged well to date. As its name implies, the story is about a young boy named Huckleberry Huck Finn growing up in the fictitious town of St. Petersburg near the Mississippi River, and is almost semi-autobiographical of Twain's childhood living in pre-Civil War Hannibal, Missouri. While Huck is on one of his quote-unquote runaway adventures, he meets a slave named Jim Watson, who himself is running away from his master. This poses a great dilemma for Huck, who had been taught that supporting fugitive slaves was a terrible sin. While getting to know and bond with Jim, it can almost be said that Huck unlearns and overcomes the racist things he's been taught. Like I said, this novel's take on race may be somewhat questionable today, but at its time, it faced a different kind of backlash for challenging the racist, pro-slavery views that were normative of the society it came from. Thank you all so much for watching. As you could probably tell if you watched the whole way through, I love good American literature that tells stories of and provides context of its rich yet controversial history, even if the stories and characters themselves are fictitious. What's your favorite work of American literature and why? Let me know in the comments down below, and I'll see you next time. Bye!